You're a gladiator in Rome in 98 AD, you've been fighting in the arena for 15 years and you've survived because you fight well and you're lucky, and today in the Colosseum you're matched against a new opponent, a young gladiator. His helmet is closed, you can't see his face, and the fight begins and he's good but you're more experienced, and within minutes you've knocked him down, your sword at his throat, and the crowd is screaming 60,000 people, kill him, and thumbs are pointing down from every direction, death verdict, and you lean down to finish it and remove his helmet to see his face because gladiator tradition demands this. You kill your opponent looking at his face, and the helmet comes off and you see his face, and it's your son Marcus, sold as a slave 10 years ago to creditors for debt. He was 8 then, he's 18 now, and you recognize him immediately because he has your face, your eyes, and he recognizes you too. You see the recognition in his eyes, and you're both frozen in the arena, father and son, and the crowd is still screaming kill, and the lanista is waiting, and the emperor is waiting, and everyone is waiting to see what you'll do. 10 years ago you were a free man in Rome, poor but free. You had a wife and an 8-year-old son Marcus, and you had debts because there had been bad harvest years. Your small farm outside the city hadn't produced enough to cover what you owed to the grain merchants and the landowner who rented you the plot, and the debts accumulated with interest that doubled every year, and eventually the creditors came with legal documents and city guards and said either you pay what you owe or we take your family as slaves to work off the debt, and you couldn't pay, didn't have anything left to sell, had already sold your tools and your furniture and everything of value, and they took Marcus, just him, because he was the most valuable, young and healthy and could be trained, and your wife screamed and you begged and Marcus cried and called for you, father, and they dragged him away and put him in a cart with other children who'd been taken for debt, and that was the last time you saw him, 8 years old and terrified, and you couldn't do anything because the law was clear, debt made you property of your creditors, and they could take your children as payment. Your wife Elena never recovered from losing Marcus. She stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, spent her days staring at the door as though Marcus might walk through it, and within a year she was sick, some wasting disease that the physicians couldn't cure or wouldn't bother trying to cure for a poor woman with no money, and she died calling for Marcus, asking where he was, whether he was safe, and you lied to her in her final moments, told her that Marcus was fine, that he was being treated well, that you'd get him back soon, and she died believing those lies, and after her death you were alone, and the debts were still there, had grown larger because you'd borrowed more trying to pay for Elena's medicine, and eventually the creditors came for you too, but you were 35 years old, too old for agricultural labor, too old for most of the work that slaves did, so they sold you to a gladiator school, the Ludus Magnus near the Colosseum, because older men made good gladiator candidates. They were desperate enough to fight hard and expendable enough that their deaths didn't matter, and nobody expected you to survive long. 35 was ancient for beginning gladiator training. Most started as teenagers, but you survived the training, survived because rage kept you alive, rage at the creditors who destroyed your family, rage at the system that turned free Romans into slaves over debt, rage at yourself for failing to protect your wife and son, and rage made you fierce in the arena, made you fight with a desperation that crowds love, and you won your first match and your second, and after 5 matches you were still alive when most men your age died in their first or second fight, and the lanista noticed you, started giving you better equipment, better food, started putting you in more prominent matches because you were profitable, and 15 years passed in this routine, fight, survive, recover, train, fight again, and you stopped thinking about Marcus most of the time because thinking about him hurt too much, and you assumed he was dead, assumed that an 8-year-old sold into slavery probably hadn't survived to adulthood, and you made peace with this assumption, and you focused on surviving one more day, one more fight, one more chance to earn enough prize money to eventually buy your freedom, and you never imagined that Marcus was alive, never imagined he'd been sold to a gladiator school just like you, never imagined that the lanista who owned you both knew exactly what he was doing when he matched you against each other today. The day started like any other fight day. You woke before dawn in the gladiator barracks, ate the barley porridge and beans that all gladiators ate, checked your equipment, sharpened your sword, and tried not to think about the fact that today might be the day you died, because thinking about death made you hesitate and hesitation got you killed. The lanista called the fighters who'd be performing today, read out the matchups, and when he said your name paired against the new fighter from the Eastern School, you felt nothing particular, just the usual pre-fight tension. New fighters were often overconfident and that made them easier to kill, but sometimes they were desperate, and desperate fighters were dangerous because they had nothing to lose. They marched you and the other gladiators through the underground tunnels beneath the Colosseum, the hypogeum where animals and fighters waited before being lifted into the arena, and you could hear the crowd above, 60,000 people filling the amphitheater, their voices creating a constant roar like ocean waves, and you'd performed in front of crowds hundreds of times, but you never got used to it, never stopped feeling the fear that tightened your chest and made your hands shake slightly, and you controlled the fear through routine, through the familiar pattern of checking your armor, testing your sword grip, breathing slowly and steadily, and when the lift raised you up into the blinding sunlight of the arena floor, you let the roar of the crowd wash over you and pushed all thought from your mind, became nothing but weapon and instinct and will to survive. Your opponent emerged from the opposite gate, younger, faster moving, his armor marking him as a secutor, a chaser, which meant you were playing the role of Retiarius, the net fighter, and you preferred this matchup because it gave you range advantage with the trident and net could keep the younger man at distance and tire him out, and the fight began with the traditional salute to the Emperor's box. Both of you raising weapons and shouting, "Those who are about to die salute you." And then the horn sounded and combat started, and your opponent came at you aggressively, exactly what you expected from young fighter trying to impress the crowd, and you let him attack, dodged and parried, made him waste energy, and after about 3 minutes you saw him starting to slow, starting to breathe harder, and you feinted with the net, got him to commit to a dodge and swept his legs with the trident shaft, and he went down, and you had your sword at his throat before he could recover, and the crowd erupted, and you'd won again, another survival, another day of life, and then you reached down to remove his helmet because tradition demanded you give your opponent the dignity of dying with his face shown, and that's when your world ended. The face under the helmet is impossible and undeniable simultaneously. Impossible because Marcus should be dead or lost or anywhere but here, undeniable because you'd recognize those features anywhere. They're your own features reflected back younger, the same nose you see in polished metal when you check your shaving, the same shape of jaw, the same dark eyes that Elena had, and for a moment your mind can't process what you're seeing, tries to reject it as hallucination or stress-induced vision, but Marcus speaks and his voice is real, rough from exertion but clear, and he says, "Father," and the word hits you like a gladius to the chest, and you realize this is real, your son is here, you've just defeated him in combat, your sword is at his throat, and 60,000 people are screaming for you to kill him. Marcus is looking at you with eyes that are afraid but also relieved, and he says quietly, voice almost lost in the crowd noise, "It's really you, I thought I recognized your fighting style, I've watched you before from the barracks, they told me I'd be fighting the veteran but they didn't tell me your name, and I hoped but I didn't think," and he stops talking because what else is there to say, you've found each other in the worst possible way, in the worst possible place, and reunion means nothing when one of you has to die in the next few minutes because the crowd demands it, and refusing the crowd means the guards will kill you both. You're frozen, sword still at his throat but unable to press forward, unable to complete the kill, and your mind is racing through impossible calculations, trying to find a way out, and you look up at the Emperor's box hoping to see the Emperor, hoping to appeal directly for mercy, but the Emperor isn't even watching, is talking to an advisor about something, and the crowd's cheering is starting to turn to confusion, starting to shift to anger because you're taking too long, breaking the rhythm of the games, and in gladiatorial combat when you've won you're supposed to look to the crowd for verdict, thumbs up for mercy or thumbs down for death, and usually the verdict is death because crowds paid to see blood not mercy, but you look anyway, look around the Colosseum at 60,000 faces, and you see nothing but thumbs pointing down, thousands and thousands of death verdicts, and Marcus sees them too, and he says, "You have to do it, Father, if you don't they'll kill us both, and at least if you do it I'll die quickly, I'll die by your hand, and that's better than dying to strangers." You're still frozen when the Lanista enters the arena, which is unusual, the Lanista normally stays in the hypogeum managing fighters, only comes onto the sand when there's a problem, and you realize immediately that this is a test, that the Lanista knew exactly who you were fighting, knew that Marcus was your son, and arranged this match deliberately to see what you'd do, to see if you were truly the emotionless killing machine that 15 years in the arena was supposed to create, or if you still had human weakness, still had feelings that could be exploited. The Lanista walks toward you slowly, making a show of it for the crowd, and he's carrying a whip, which he'll use on you if you refuse to complete the kill, and when he gets close enough that only you and Marcus can hear, he says quietly, "This is what it means to be a gladiator, you kill who I tell you to kill when I tell you to kill them, and if you can't kill your own son then you're useless to me, and I'll have you both executed as cowards, so make your choice, kill him quick and clean, or refuse and watch him die slow and painful along with you." The Lanista steps back and raises his arms to the crowd, and the crowd roars approval. They think he's come to ensure the execution happens properly, think this is all part of the show, and perhaps it is, perhaps this whole thing has been choreographed as entertainment, the veteran gladiator forced to kill his long-lost son, a tragedy for the masses, and you understand that the Lanista has been planning this, has been waiting for the right moment, has known for weeks or months that Marcus was your son, probably checked the slave records when Marcus arrived from the Eastern School, saw the family connection, and saved this revelation for maximum dramatic effect, because gladiators are entertainment and nothing entertains a Roman crowd like real tragedy played out on blood-soaked sand. Marcus is still on the ground, hasn't moved, isn't trying to escape or fight back, has accepted his death with the fatalism that comes from 10 years of slavery, 10 years of learning that resistance is pointless and compliance is the only path to minimizing suffering, and he's looking at you not with fear now but with something like compassion, trying to make this easier for you, trying to give you permission to do what has to be done, and he says, "I understand, Father, I know you have to, I know this isn't your choice, and I forgive you, I forgave you a long time ago for what happened when I was 8, I know you didn't want to lose me, I know the debt wasn't your fault, and I'm grateful I got to see you one more time before the end, got to know you survived, got to tell you that I never blamed you," and these words are a gift and a curse because they make what you have to do both more bearable and more unbearable simultaneously. You look down at Marcus and you look up at the crowd and you look at the Lanista, and you're trying to find an option that doesn't exist, trying to find a path where both of you survive, where you can refuse to kill your son and somehow escape with him, fight your way out of the arena, flee Rome, live free somewhere, but this fantasy dissolves the moment it forms because you're one agent aging gladiator and he's a wounded young one, and there are hundreds of guards around the Colosseum, and even if you could fight through them, where would you go? 2 escaped gladiators are hunted down and crucified within days, and crucifixion takes days of agony before death, and compared to that a quick sword through the heart is mercy, and Marcus knows this, has calculated the same impossible math, and he's asking you through his eyes to give him the mercy, to make it fast, to spare him the torture that refusing would bring. The crowd is getting louder, starting to throw things into the arena, bits of food and stones, showing their displeasure at the delay, and soon they'll start demanding both fighters be executed for cowardice, for breaking the rhythm of the games, and the emperor might be forced to respond to keep the crowd happy, might give the death order for both of you, and then Marcus dies anyway but you die too, and at least if you complete the fight the Lanista might let you live, might honor his implied promise to consider freedom for gladiators who prove their absolute loyalty, and living means maybe someday telling someone about Marcus, keeping his memory alive, ensuring he's not just another nameless gladiator who died for entertainment. You make the decision, not because you want to but because no other decision is possible, and you lean down close to Marcus and you whisper, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I love you, I never stopped looking for you in my mind, never stopped hoping you were alive somewhere having a better life than this." And Marcus whispers back, "I know, Father, I love you too, thank you for making it quick." And you position the sword at his heart, the spot where a clean thrust will kill instantly, and Marcus closes his eyes, and you think about the 8-year-old boy who was taken from you, think about all the years you lost, all the moments you should have shared, teaching him to farm, watching him grow, seeing him marry and have children, all the life that was stolen from both of you by debt and slavery and Rome's brutal entertainment industry, and then you thrust the sword home, fast and clean, and Marcus gasps once and goes still, and your son is dead by your hand, and the crowd erupts in approval, and the Lanista nods satisfied, and you stand over your son's body and raise your bloody sword to acknowledge the crowd's approval, and inside you're screaming but outside you're the perfect gladiator, emotionless, efficient, ready for the next fight. They give you a few moments with the body before the slaves come to drag it away, and you kneel beside Marcus and close his eyes properly, the way you closed Elena's eyes 10 years ago, and you notice details you missed during the fight, scars on his arms from training, calluses on his hands from gripping weapons, evidence of the life he lived after being taken from you, 10 years of slavery and combat training and learning to survive in a world that treated him as expendable entertainment, and you wish you could have known him as an adult, wish you could have talked to him about those 10 years, learned what he experienced, who he became, but all you have are these few moments with his corpse, and then the slaves arrive with hooks and chains, and they drag him away like they drag away all the dead gladiators, toward the spoliarium where bodies are stripped of useful equipment before being dumped in mass graves outside the city, and you watch him go and you know you'll never see him again, never visit his grave because gladiators don't get marked graves, don't get memorials, just disappear into the earth unmarked and unmourned except by the few people who love them. The Lanista approaches as you're leaving the arena, and he claps you on the shoulder like you've done something commendable, and he says, "That was good, that was what I needed to see, proof that you understand what it means to be gladiator, that personal feelings can't interfere with duty, and I'm impressed, truly impressed, and I want you to know that I'm considering you for freedom, maybe 6 more fights, maybe a year, and then manumission, you've earned it." And his words make you want to kill him, want to wrap your hands around his throat and strangle him, but you just nod and thank him because killing the Lanista means immediate execution, and staying alive means Marcus's death wasn't completely meaningless, means someday you might earn freedom and can tell his story, can ensure someone remembers that Marcus existed, that he was brave, that he died with dignity, that he forgave his father for failing to protect him. That night in the barracks you can't sleep, keep seeing Marcus's face when the helmet came off, keep hearing his voice saying, "I forgive you," keep feeling the resistance as your sword punched through his heart, and the other gladiators leave you alone because they can see something is wrong, can see that today's fight was different somehow, and one old gladiator who's been in the ludus almost as long as you comes over and sits beside you and says, "You knew him," not a question but a statement, and you nod, and the old gladiator says, "Was he your son?" And you nod again, and the old man says, "I'm sorry, I've seen that happen before, fathers fighting sons, brothers fighting brothers." The Lanistas think it's entertaining, think it proves something about discipline and obedience, but it's just cruelty, just one more way they break us. And you appreciate his understanding, but it doesn't help, nothing helps. You killed your son today, and no amount of understanding or sympathy can change that fact. 3 weeks later you're back in the arena for your next scheduled fight, and the routine is the same: wake early, eat barley porridge, check equipment, wait in the hypogeum, rise into the arena, salute the emperor, fight, and you go through the motions mechanically, but something is different. Something inside you broke when you killed Marcus, and you're not fighting to survive anymore, you're fighting because it's what you do, because you don't know how to do anything else, and your opponent today is a younger man, strong and fast, and normally you'd be cautious, would use your experience to wear him down, but today you don't care, today you fight recklessly, take risks you normally wouldn't take, and your opponent is confused by this, can't figure out why you're fighting like a man who wants to die, and the confusion gives you advantage, and you win again, another survival, another day, and the crowd cheers, and the Lanista is pleased, and you feel nothing. The pattern repeats over the following months, fight after fight, victory after victory, and you're racking up wins at a rate that's unusual even for experienced gladiators. And the lanista is delighted because you're profitable, you're filling the Colosseum. People are coming specifically to watch you fight because you've developed a reputation for spectacular violence, for fighting with a fury that makes every match memorable, and what the crowd interprets as passion or bloodlust is actually just emptiness. You're fighting without fear because you don't care if you live or die, and paradoxically this makes you nearly invincible because you take risks that more cautious fighters won't take, and often those risks pay off. After your 25th victory since Marcus's death, the lanista calls you to his office, and he tells you that he's decided to grant your freedom. You've proven yourself beyond any question, you've earned enough prize money to cover what he paid for you 15 years ago plus considerable profit, and he's willing to give you the rudis, the wooden sword that symbolizes manumission, and you're free. You can leave the ludus, leave Rome if you want, start a new life, and he seems to expect gratitude, seems to think he's doing you a favor, and you take the rudis and you thank him mechanically, and you walk out of the ludus for the first time in 15 years as a free man, and you feel nothing because freedom means nothing when everyone you loved is dead. You're free but you have nowhere to go and nothing to go back to. The farm where you lived with Elena and Marcus was sold for debt decades ago. You have no family left, no friends, you're 47 years old and all you know is fighting, and you drift around Rome for a few weeks trying to figure out what free men do with their days, and you discover that freedom is actually harder than slavery in some ways because now you have choices and responsibilities, have to find work and housing, have to navigate a city that's changed in the 15 years you were locked in the ludus, and you end up taking work as a guard for a wealthy merchant who's impressed by your gladiator reputation, thinks having a veteran arena fighter as security will deter thieves and impress clients. The work is boring compared to arena combat, just standing around looking intimidating while the merchant conducts business, but it pays adequately and gives you structure, gives you something to do with your days, and at night you drink wine in cheap taverns and try not to think about Marcus, try not to remember his face when you killed him, but the memories come anyway, always come when you're trying to sleep, and you've developed a habit of drinking until you pass out because that's the only way to avoid the nightmares, and the tavern keepers know you're former gladiator and they treat you with wary respect, give you space because everyone knows gladiators are dangerous even when retired, especially when retired and drinking. One night a young man approaches your table and he's nervous and he tells you his name is Gaius and he's a student studying rhetoric and he's writing about gladiators for a project and he wants to interview you if you're willing, and normally you'd refuse but you're drunk enough that talking seems easier than silence, and Gaius asks you questions about arena combat, about training, about what it's like to kill people for entertainment, and you answer mechanically until he asks, did you ever kill anyone you knew, anyone you recognized? And the question stops you cold, and after a long pause you tell him about Marcus, tell him the whole story, the debt, the sale, the 15 years of separation, the recognition in the arena, the impossible choice, and Gaius listens with growing horror, and when you finish he says, that's the most tragic thing I've ever heard, that should be written down, that should be remembered, and you say, why, what good does remembering do? It doesn't bring him back, doesn't change anything, and Gaius says, no, but it means his death mattered, means he's not just another nameless gladiator, means someone knows his story. Gaius does write it down, includes it in his rhetoric project, and years later a historian researching gladiatorial combat finds Gaius's account in a library archive, and the historian includes it in a book about the brutality of Roman entertainment, and Marcus's story becomes one of many examples of how the arena destroyed families and created tragedies for the amusement of crowds, and in this way Marcus's death does end up mattering, does end up remembered, not the way you wanted, not the way he deserved, but remembered nonetheless, and perhaps that's the most that can be hoped for when history has ground you and everyone you loved into dust. You live another 13 years after gaining your freedom, working as a guard, drinking too much, carrying the weight of what you did to Marcus, and the weight doesn't get lighter with time like people say it should, doesn't fade or become bearable, just becomes familiar, becomes part of your daily existence like a chronic injury that never fully heals, and you learn to function around it but it's always there, always pulling at you, especially in quiet moments when you're alone and have nothing to distract you from your thoughts. You're 60 years old when your body finally starts to break down, 15 years of arena combat caught up with you, old injuries that healed wrong, scars that ache when it rains, joints that don't move like they used to, and you develop a cough that won't go away, and the merchant you work for lets you go because you're not intimidating anymore, you're just an old man who looks like he might collapse, and you end up living in one of Rome's insulae, the crowded tenement buildings where the poor and the broken accumulate, and you survive on the small amount of money you'd saved from guard work, but it's running out, and you know the end is coming, and you're not afraid because death means reunion with Elena and Marcus, means finally being released from the weight you've carried for 13 years. You die in your sleep one winter night in 124 AD, age 60, alone in a small rented room, and nobody finds your body for 3 days, and when they do find you there's no family to claim you, no one to arrange funeral rites, you're just another dead old man in a city full of dead old men, and they burn your body in a mass cremation with other unclaimed corpses, and your ashes go into an unmarked pit outside the city walls, same as the gladiators you killed, same as Marcus, all of you ending up in the same anonymous earth, and perhaps there's justice in that. The arena's victims and perpetrators gladiators reunited in death, all equally forgotten, all equally turned to dust. But your story survived because of Gaius's account, survived because the historian found it valuable as an example of Roman brutality, and centuries later scholars studying gladiatorial combat still reference your case, still cite the tragedy of the father who killed his son in the Colosseum, and they debate what it means, what it reveals about Roman society, about human nature, about the systems that force people into impossible choices, and some scholars argue you're a villain, a man who chose survival over humanity, while others argue you're a victim, a man trapped in an impossible situation who made the only choice available, and perhaps both interpretations are correct. Perhaps you were simultaneously villain and victim, perpetrator and casualty, and perhaps that complexity is what makes your story worth remembering, worth studying, worth understanding, because simple stories don't teach us anything but complex stories reveal the truth about how humans behave when they're caught between love and survival, between duty and conscience, between what they want to do and what they're forced to do, and your story reveals that sometimes there are no good choices, only choices that let you survive one more day while carrying the weight of what you had to do to survive.